Hello, this is Angelia, and you are listening to or watching the podcast Why You Do What You Do. It's the podcast that talks about human development and psychology to try and help you figure out maybe a little bit more about why you do what you do. And last time we were talking on youth violence epidemic, and it's not as bad as it was, back in the 90s, but it's still not great. Adolescents are more likely to turn violent if they have witnessed or have been victims of violence, such as physical abuse or neighborhood fights. So, that just is common sense. Kids see violence on TV or in the neighborhood. They might emulate that. I know that's a fact because I had some kids who didn't watch violent programming. They watched PBS. And then a friend of mine came over with her children and they wanted to watch one of the popular shows, and there was fighting in this show. Well, those kids, went their own way to their own house, and my kids were here. Next thing I know, my kids are, fighting and having a food fight, which is something that was showed on the program. And I'm like, no, absolutely not. So my children definitely emulated what they saw on the television. So, I believe that's 100% fact right there. And if fighting is going on in the neighborhood, they're more likely to fight. I know in my neighborhood it was, in my school it was, and so, I felt like that was a way to solve some problems, And they never really did. It got somebody to maybe leave you alone for a while, but then they would tell the next person and the next person. It's kind of like in the old days when it says about a gunfighter, they're never done because somebody else wants to try them out. It's kind of like that with fighting. You fight one person, then the next guy comes along. Well, they want to fight you too. They think they can beat you. So it becomes on and on until finally you just say, no, I'm not doing this anymore. Exposure to media violence has a significant impact by desensitizing viewers to violence and depicting situations in which aggression is rewarded or justified. And that's a big thing is, with the gangs. These big guys in the gangs got money and nice cars and, a little respect, street cred. And these other people see that and say, I'd like to have that. So if there's a reward for them being violent and aggressive, that's going to even further, make that attractive to them. 1 in 5 rock music videos portrays overt violence, and 1 in 4 depicts weapon carrying. Now, that was from a study they did in '97. Now, I don't think it's as much nowadays because they've kind of cracked down on that. And so nowadays, it's pretty much all about the music, or maybe have a story video or whatever. So that was in '97 when they did this study. I don't think it's like that today. In a community sample of 707 adolescents and young adults, the amount of time spent watching television predicted the likelihood of aggression, even when previous aggressive behavior and other risk factors were controlled. So, if your kids are watching violent television, chances are they're going to act out in a violent manner. That's just common sense. Despite occasional widely published and publicized tragedies, the epidemic of youth violence seems to be abating. And, thankfully that's true. Between 1991 and 97, the percentage of high school students nationwide who reported carrying a weapon dropped by about 1/3, from 24% to 18%. Still a dangerously high number. So, it's getting better. And like I said, nowadays you can't have weapons in school. This was when I was studying in the mid to late 2000s and into the 2010s and 2020s, unfortunately. Your average person might go to school and, be through their program in, 8 or more years. It took me 13 because as a single mom, I couldn't afford classes on a regular basis. I had to pay as I go. And then, that keeps me from getting a license here in my state I live in, because you have to go to a school in this state or have a license from another state and come in. So I was only allowed to get my education and use that for my own, uses in life coaching and as a psychological consultant, which I still had to be, insured for. I had to have malpractice insurance as a psychological consultant. So, there's some things in here are dated, but the book is not that old, from like 97, but that's the study they're quoting came from the 97. A report by the Surgeon General of the United States challenges several myths or stereotypes about youth violence. See, that study was in 2001. One of the worst is the myth that, good gosh, nothing can be done to prevent or treat violence behavior. And of course, that's not true. Like I said, you gotta nip that in the bud. If a child is exhibiting violent behavior, you need to step in and figure out why, and do what you can to stop it. Like I said, my kids, I didn't like that, and once that, I was like, yeah, we're not watching this crap anymore. We're going back to the PBS channel. I'm watching the good educational programs that are going to help you be smarter, not little hoodlums. Unfortunately, about half of the hundreds of programs being used in schools and communities fall short when rigorously evaluated, and some may actually be counterproductive, according to the report. So, kids are going to want to do and watch what their peers are doing. So, you can control at your house, but you can't control at school, and you can't control at other kids' houses when they go to other kids' houses. So, that's a problem. So, you need to talk to the kids and say, this is how I want it here. So-and-so does this, I don't care. I'm not so-and-so's mom, I'm your mom, or dad, or whatever. And this is how it is here in this house. And the children might not like that, but they're going to have to respect that, so, Effective programs address both individual risks and environmental conditions. And with my oldest child, like I said, he had some problems, and we won't get into exactly, but I had, they call it family services at the time, come to my home because they were concerned about the environment in my home. They thought that was the problem. And they came out to my home, and when they came to the home, they saw the home was, as clean as I could keep it. I can't do as much as I could. Back then it was fairly clean. We had the little dog, and the lady was, oh my gosh, our little dog is so cute. It was a little Pomeranian at the time. And she saw that we weren't scumbags. And, we were trying to be decent people, and that my son had access to, magazines, instruments, things like that, as, when they started getting in there and looking at that. So, we had a talk when they were here, and I said, well, did you talk to, his ECE teacher? And they were like, oh, well, no, we didn't, I didn't even realize. And I'm like, yeah, he got tested, he's in, ECE this part of the day, he's going to see a psychiatrist, there's medication and things. And, sometimes you're doing all you can, but that's all you can do. Some things just have to run their course and work out. They focus on the individual youth by building skills and competencies, and that's something that the doctor was working with us on him to accentuate the positive. Like they had a juggling class, and so we let him take that because he was interested in that, and he played little league ball, and he played soccer for a while, and it does help to give the kids something else to do. They provide parent effectiveness training, because parents a lot of times didn't get good parenting training from their own parents. That's why I said me and my husband, we went to the community center, and we took parenting classes, you know. And it didn't hurt that that took some off of our bill. You know, if you took the parenting class, you got money off your bill after you had the baby, so that was pretty cool. But we both knew we didn't have the best, you know, parenting situations, so we wanted to know how to do it right, you know. And a lot of people have that problem, and I don't think there's any shame, excuse me, about taking parenting classes. In my opinion, everybody should be required to take parenting classes while you're pregnant, you know. Get them under your belt so that when that little person comes out, you know how to effectively raise them. You know, when the world be a much better place if that's how it worked with everybody. And they try to improve the school's social climate through interventions addressed to peer groups. Now, I told you a while back, my children had a group when they were in school, and I thought that was great. You know, they go in, they talk and everything, and talk about things, and, you know, talk about any misunderstandings kids might have with each other, and, you know, I think it's great. And I hope that they keep that up, and that they're still doing that, and they're going to continue to do that. A program in Galveston, Texas, that addressed specific risk factors led to a drop in arrests for juvenile crime. And that's the goal here, you know, is to keep our kids on the right path, not end up being criminals. So any interventions, in my opinion, are a good thing. Here are 5 myths about youth violence. The first myth is most future offenders can be identified in early childhood. The fact is, children with conduct disorders or uncontrolled behavior do not necessarily turn out to be violent adolescents. And mine certainly did not. He became one of the most easygoing guys there is. So, another myth is African American and Hispanic youth are more likely than other ethnic youth to become involved in violence. The fact is, although arrest rates differ and self-reports suggest that race and ethnicity have little effect on the overall proportion of what is this word? It's all weird. Of violent behavior. So, race doesn't matter. One myth is a new breed of super predators who grew to adolescence in the 1990s threatens to make the United States an even more violent place than it is. And I've heard that the boomers are down on the millennials, but you know. The fact is, there is no evidence that young people involved in violence during the peak 1990s were more violent or more vicious than youths in earlier years. It's just the reporting got to be more often and more sensationalized. You know, people got more interested in the drama. And if people weren't sucking up the drama, then, you know, this wouldn't become a sensationalized thing. One myth is trying young offenders in tough adult criminal courts makes them less likely to commit more violent crimes. The facts are, juveniles handled in adult courts have significantly higher. Some of these things are been rubbed where I've like highlighted things. It's kind of like rubbed out. Rates of repeat offenses and of later felonies than young offenders handled in juvenile courts. So actually the opposite is true. When they try juveniles as adults, it makes them harder because they come in there with the hardened criminals, and it makes them more hopeless and having a bad attitude, and they're more likely to be repeat offenders and worse criminals than if they would have had an intervention program to try to set them on the straight and narrow. One myth is most violent youths will end up being arrested for violent crimes. The facts are, most youths involved in violent behavior will never be arrested for a violent crime. Because when we're young, as we talked about earlier, your brain is not working at its peak potential. You're impulsive, you're not thinking things through. And there are people who are violent when they're younger and grow up and are perfectly fine and don't commit any violent acts, you know? So, those are some myths that people like to put out there that aren't necessarily true. Interventions need to target older students as well. So, not just our middle schoolers early, but, late into high school. A lot of people, principals and vice principals think by the time you're 16, they're basically done with you. You're an adult. You just have to ride out your second, 2 years in high school. And that's not true. In addition to spotting characteristics of troubled adolescence, it is important to find ways to reduce young people's exposure to high-risk settings that encourage antisocial behavior. So, again, you got to keep an eye on things. And there are settings, that we know are not good for our children. And even though we try to let them experience things, sometimes we have to put our foot down and say, yeah, no, I'm not okay with that. It's like one of my children heard about a rave, and I'm like, no, you're in high school. You're not going to do that. No, that's not happening. So you gotta kind of put the brakes sometimes on, because remember that they're not all knowing, and they're still a little impulsive. Again, adult monitoring is important, especially after school, on weekend evenings, and in summer, when adolescents are most likely to be idle and to get into trouble. So, like I say, you know where your kids are. I had friends' phone numbers, and like I said, one of mine stayed out past curfew one time. I tracked him down. All his friends' mothers knew that he had done this because I was calling around. And then when I finally found him, I pulled him out of where he was and got him in the car, and I said, okay, I hope you had fun, because you're not going anywhere for the next 2 weeks. So, sometimes you got to be the baddie, but it's for being a goodie. Getting teenagers involved in constructive activities during their free time can pay long-range dividends. So give them something to do. Get them into a program or a camp or whatever. Have them help you with something. Give them a project. Well, this summer we're going to help, build this in the garage with your dad, or this summer we're going to paint the house, Give them something to do, because idle hands do the devil's work, as my grandma used to say. Participation in extracurricular school activities tends to cut down on dropout and criminal arrest rates among high-risk boys and girls. So if you get your child interested in something, if they have something else besides just, school, then they're more likely to be more okay with their life and not feel like they need to act out and have a bad attitude and become a violent person. And this goes for adults too. If all you have in your life is work, then you're more likely to be that way. So you need to enrich your life with things that make you happy and give you a sense of purpose other than just going to work 9 to 5 every day. Delinquent and pre-delinquent teenagers tend to be stuck in Kohlberg Stage 2. Like preschoolers, they are deterred from misconduct only by the threat of punishment and fear of getting caught. And unfortunately, there are teenagers still stuck in this mindset, this mental operations set of preschoolers. And unfortunately, there are adults who never get past this stage either. They're stuck in this mindset of they're going to do what they want to do, and only on threat of getting caught or getting in trouble do they stop. And that's unfortunate. By moving to stage 3, where they are more concerned with meeting social norms and expectations, they may develop a cognitive buffer against temptation. So, if you give them something else in their life, they might start to see that life is worth living. That they can do things in their life, and life isn't all about the drudge, the 9 to 5, or at school it's like 7 to 3 or whatever, 8 to 4. But they start to see that life can be worth living, and that's what you need to give them, is something of their own, something outside of school, that makes life worth living. And then they can start to see and move on in their development, to where it's not all, has to be under threat. That they can do things because they want to do the right thing, because they have some self-respect, and that's what it's all about. If you respect yourself, you can respect others, and that's a good thing for our society. This may happen through interaction with a partner who is of higher peer status and at a higher level of moral reasoning. It was found when 40 institutionalized young male offenders were paired off with peers for face-to-face discussion of moral issues. So again, if I'm sure you all remember the Scared Straight program they had a while back, but it makes a difference if people are talking to people like themselves, and they come across people who have better ideas, better ways of coping than they do, then they are more likely to internalize and adopt those ways of doing things. So, if your kid's got a problem, you might want to have an older adult mentor them. When I felt like my sons were getting bad input from, the space at their father's, their uncle kind of stepped in. He was taking them out to car shows and things like that and talked to them about things. And, I'm glad that he was willing to do that for them. Now that fell off, but, he did that. Thus, peer interaction can stimulate moral growth if the peer climate is positive. So, like I said, you need to see who those kids are around. You need to make sure they're with good friends, not bad friends. And, like I say, you can tell them, I don't like so-and-so because he's doing bad things. And, I don't appreciate that. And me and one of my sons was talking about a kid the other day. And he was like, oh, yeah, you were right about that kid. He grew up to be this. And he was in jail and all that. And, I'm like, yeah. Because, like I said, we can see things as older adults that kids can't see. Because kids' mind is not finished developing yet, and they're very impulsive. Teenagers are very impulsive. So, as the adult, sometimes we need to be the voice of reason and step in and say, hey, yeah, no. Fortunately, the greatest majority of adolescents do not get into serious trouble. And, that's the facts. Most of our kids are pretty good kids, and their troubles are the basic troubles that all teenagers have. Those who do show disturbed behavior can and should be helped. Like I said, if you see something that ain't quite right, it's your job to step in. Don't hope it's a phase or hope they'll outgrow it or whatever, because chances are they won't. It'll only get worse. So you need to step in, have a little intervention and say, yeah, this is not okay. I don't want this for you, and we're going to get some help. With love, guidance, and support, adolescents can avoid risks, build on their strengths, and explore their possibilities as they approach adult life. And that's what, you're teaching them as a parent, how to avoid risks in their life, because they don't know. And they're impulsive, so they're not thinking about the risk. They're just thinking about the payoff for them. And they do have strengths. And, they need to build on those. And that's what, when, like, the school counselors look at, like, what is this kid's best subject, if I had an A+ in psychology, they're going to say, hey, your best subject was psychology. Maybe you should do something with that. And, if they're good debaters, maybe they could be on the debate club. If they're good artists, they should be in art. Build on their strengths, because what comes easy to them and what they like is what's going to take them, into the future, because it's something that they're interested in. Oh my gosh. So if you come up with a nice, well-adjusted young person, they're going to come out into the world and have a better life than someone who's maladjusted and doesn't know, what they want out of their life, and feels like, they weren't even ready to have a life. So, it's kind of up to us as the adults to guide them, to the edge of the nest so they can work on their wings and fly away someday. The normal developmental changes in the early years of life are obvious and dramatic signs of growth. And let's face it, from the time they're a baby to the time they're, a grown person, that's a lot of growth. You started out, as someone this big and you ended up, 6 foot whatever. That's a lot of growth. So, not only the physical growth, but the mental growth. You were born, you didn't even know how to talk. You could barely, eat by yourself. So you went from that to being a person that, thinks about things. The infant lying in the crib becomes an active, exploring toddler. The young child enters and embraces the world of school and society. The adolescent, with a new body and new awareness, prepares to step into adulthood. Growth and development do not screech to a stop after adolescence. People change in many ways throughout early, middle, and late adulthood. And if you think about that, we sure do. None of us are who we were when we were a teenager. None of us are who we were when we were a preteen or a kid or a toddler. And if you are, that's something you need to work on. You should be developing beyond these stages. At one time, developmental scientists considered the years from the end of adolescence to the onset of old age a relatively uneventful plateau. But research tells us that this is not so. So, back when they first started having developmental, research, it's thought, okay, you're a kid, then you're a grown person, and then you're old. There was no stages in between, and there were no thoughts about how these stages were navigated. Growth and decline go on throughout life in a balance that differs for each individual. So we all become adults at our own pace, and we all start to decline at our own pace. Like I said, some people don't ever even reach full cognitive development. That's sad, but that's a fact. They were too damaged as a child, or they don't have the opportunity to learn about that, or both. So, choices and events during young adulthood, which we define approximately as the span between ages 20 and 40, have much to do with how that balance is struck. Because that's when you're becoming who you are. Your 20s, you're in higher education still usually, and you're figuring out what you want to do, who you want to be, and that's your focus. And then in your 30s, you're trying to build that foundation under yourself. You want that, house. You want them little people brought into your life now that you have a stable foundation under yourself. And then in your 40s, you're perfecting yourself. You're perfecting, your professional life, yourself as a person. And that's how it should be. During these 2 decades, human beings build a foundation for much of their later development. And that's if you have, the chance to have a stable, life. This is when people typically leave their parents' homes, start jobs or careers, get married, or establish other intimate relationships, have and raise children, and begin to contribute significantly to their communities. And this is for normal development, and like they say, everyone develops at their own pace. So if you're ahead of schedule or behind schedule, don't worry about that. You're developing at your own pace. They make decisions that will affect the rest of their lives, their health, their happiness, and their success. And once you become an adult, every decision now affects your life because your body's grown. And when you're a kid, you're still growing. So if you eat 7 pieces of pizza, it might not be leading you to coronary artery disease. But once you become an adult and you're not growing like that anymore, that's not a good idea. Trust me, I've had 2 heart episodes and a gestational stroke, so, you gotta take care of yourself. You can't always live like you're 17, but, that would be great if we could, right? And your happiness. You have to take steps towards your happiness. No one's going to deliver that to you. No one's going to drop it in your lap and say, here you go. Not going to happen. It'd be great if it did, wouldn't it? But you need to go after your own happiness. And if you don't know what that is, you can look back to when you were a kid. What made me happy? What did I want to do with my life? And figure it out. And, like I said, most of us, we have to work 9 to 5 or whatever. I'm in forced retirement because I just can't work for somebody else. I can't. Because, I have to do when I can, what I can. And bosses ain't going to deal with that, So, it's like, hey, my sciatica hurts today. I can't sit here and do this for you today. They ain't going to deal with that. So, your happiness is what's important to you. And your success is how you define it. I have come to the point, I had jobs, that I worked up in and became, the point where I was the office manager. I ran my own ministry, outreach, and education for 17 years. I was the director of a charity for 9 years. And now I define my success as if I taught you something today, that was a success. And then, like I said, I have my own hobbies that I'm concentrating in, trying to, bring in a little something. I don't like being dependent on my husband. I really don't, because in my opinion, in my experience, if you're dependent on somebody else, then they get to make decisions. And I don't like people making decisions for me. I like making my own decisions. So, I feel like I need to have a little something coming in so I have a say. That's just me. But that's where I'm going to leave you today. And I hope this help you figure out a little bit more about why you do what you do. Please like and share this educational program so we can spread it around the world. If you want to help me out, subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you want to help me out even more, go to my Patreon page and become a patron. That's all for now. Until next time.